For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has become one of the most mysterious and controversial pieces of cloth on the face of the planet.
All four of the Gospels mention that Jesus was taken down from the cross. He was wrapped in linen, and then his body was put in the tomb.
Legends and skeptics have circled the Shroud of Turin for centuries, yet its faded linen image still sparks fierce debate. Now, an AI algorithm has peeled back layers of doubt and wonder by analyzing the cloth in ways no human eye ever could.
Skeptics believe the shroud was forged to satisfy a huge demand for Christian relics.
What the program uncovered isn't a half-buried medieval forgery or a simple photographic relic. It's a visual revelation that's forcing experts to rethink everything from the physics of image formation to the very possibility of resurrection. Forget dusty theories and endless speculation. This AI-driven discovery demands a fresh look at one of history's greatest mysteries.
The Shroud of Turin is this amazing relic. At bottom, it's a piece of cloth.
Threads of truth.
That has been making the rounds on social media this week about an apparent new discovery regarding the Shroud of Turin.
They brought the linen into the lab like a guest at a strange family reunion, quiet, wrapped, and full of old stories. The Shroud of Turin is not a small thing in memory or size. It is a long piece of cloth, about 14.5 feet by 3.7 feet, with the faint, haunting image of a crucified man stamped across its weave. For many people, that face is more than a picture. It is proof. It is the cloth that some say wrapped the Messiah after they took him down from the cross 2,000 years ago. For centuries, people have argued about how the image got there and how old the fabric really is. In 1988, carbon dating pointed one way, and the debate grew loud.
This might be legit, and I know you believe it 100%, but here's the most important question. What if it is?
But science does not stay still, and neither do the methods that study the past. In 2022, a team in Italy took a new look using a new AI tool, wide-angle X-ray scattering, or WAXS. Dr. Liberato De Caro from Italy's Institute of Crystallography led the work. WAXS is like a deep kind of radiography. Imagine the kind of scan a doctor uses to look for a broken bone. This scan does not just see the surface, it reads the pattern inside the threads.
But based on the evidence that we do indeed have a 2,000-year-old burial shroud. Now, why do we believe it's Jesus?
Over time, linen breaks down in a way that leaves a kind of fingerprint the size of atoms. Wax reads that fingerprint. The sample they used was tiny, about 0.5 millimeter by 1 millimeter, that is smaller than a grain of rice. It came from the corner of the shroud near the feet, a spot close to where a famous thread sample had been taken in the 1980s. The X-ray work was done at the X-ray Microimaging Laboratory, the XMILAB, part of the CNRIC. Working with the fragment of the relic, De Caro and his team confidently dated the material to around 2,000 years old, suggesting that the individual lived during the era of Jesus.
That is not a fake, but is really burial cloth of Jesus of Nazareth is very, very high.
The team ran the tests on several linen pieces and compared the results. When they matched the tiny worn patterns inside the shroud's linen to known samples, a surprising fit emerged. The shroud's internal wear and tear, the way its threads had degraded, lined up with a linen piece that history places at the time of the siege of Masada, about 55 to 74 CE. In plain terms, the fabric's microscopic aging looked a lot like linen that came from the 1st century. So, how could tests in the 1980s declare the shroud medieval, while another analysis in 2022 pointed straight to the 1st century? Repairing history. In 1988, the world thought it had an answer. 3 labs, Oxford, Zurich, and Arizona, took small pieces of the shroud and ran carbon dating. Their result was neat and clear on paper. The cloth was made between 2060 and 1390. That put the shroud in the Middle Ages. If true, it could not be the burial cloth of Jesus.
Now there's new research that may disprove the claim of people who've said it's an elaborate fake.
Dr. Liberato De Caro and others said the carbon result might be wrong. De Caro called out problems with how the tests were done and how the numbers were read. He said people had found procedural and statistical problems. For years, the raw data sat hidden from the public. Legal action forced its release. Only after decades could scientists see the numbers. A very loud voice in the debate was Raymond Rogers, a chemist from the STIRP team. Before he died, he wrote a peer-reviewed paper that changed how many people saw the 1988 test. He said the tiny strip used for dating came from a repaired edge of the shroud. The main cloth is linen, the sample showed cotton.
When I looked at these samples from the radiocarbon area, there's no problem at all finding cotton in them.
Rogers also found traces of dyes and chemicals used to make the edge look like the rest of the cloth. In plain words, the piece tested may not have been original at all. It had been mended. Repairs, touches, parades, and candles. The shroud has been everywhere. People have handled it for centuries. It was carried, folded, and displayed.
The Shroud of Turin, one of the rarest pieces of history, will be on display this weekend.
Smoke from candles, oils from people's hands, soot and dust all left marks. Dirt and tiny bits of minerals, like limestone, can stick in the gaps between linen fibers. Those empty spaces make up almost half the fabric's tiny inner world. At that micro level, the cloth can trap new carbon. Molds and bacteria can grow and leave more material behind. Cleaning a sample is not a perfect fix. Decoded explained that hidden bits inside the fibers can be so difficult to completely eliminate that they change the results of carbon dating. Even careful cleaning may not remove every speck. If new carbon is mixed with old, the clock that radiocarbon reads will be set to a later date. That could make a very old cloth look much newer.
A neutron irradiation that could have come from this radiation burst that led to the image on the shroud.
So the 1988 result, once taken as final, now looked fragile. The sample's origin and the centuries of contamination raised real doubts. The tests in 1988 were good for their time, but methods have moved on. Dating tools today are smarter. New techniques like AI and X-ray-based methods read the cloth in other ways. These methods measure how fibers degrade over time, not only the carbon in them. The shroud story is now a longer conversation than a single chart.
It's wild. Pull that up. Pull the Shroud of Turin up.
Oh, yeah.
It's wild to look at because it's so interesting.
Scientists are talking again, testing again, and asking the same clear question. Are we looking at a medieval relic or at cloth from the time of Jesus? The debate is only just beginning. Impossible to copy. What if you found out that people have tried again and again to make a twin of the shroud, and every time they fail? That's the short story. The long story is stranger. Scientists have tried to copy the cloth, the image, even the stains. They have tried paints, dyes, torch burns, chemical tricks, and artistic cleverness. None of it matches. Not the weave, not the tiny bits of blood, not the faint face. The shroud keeps beating every copy. The blood is one big reason.
The blood stains were incrustations, reddish incrustations on top of the cloth.
Tests show the stains are real human blood from a male. The blood type is AB+. That type is not common. It is found more often in the Middle East than in other places. Then there are the tiny time-traveling hitchhikers, pollen grains. Using artificial intelligence, scientists looked closely and found plant pollen trapped in the cloth. The pollen map reads like a travel log. Jerusalem, then northern Syria, then Anatolia, then Constantinople, and finally Europe. Israeli botanist Dr. Avinoam Danin checked the work and verified 28 different pollen species. Many of those plants grow only near Jerusalem. That doesn't prove everything, but it is a strong thread in the fabric of the story. But maybe the strangest thing is the image itself. It looks like a crucified man. That figure is not painted on top of the threads. Instead, the color sits only on the tiniest outer parts of each fiber. Little microscopic pixels. The discoloration goes in a hair-thin slice, only a tiny fraction of the width of a human hair. That means any copy must hit the fibers at that exact microscopic depth. Most methods lay color on the surface or soak it in.
And some of the linen fibers don't show any of that at all. They look just as slick as anything, and it didn't stick to them.
The shroud's image is different. It is shallow, fine, and wildly precise. Scientists who study images say the only clean way to make such a shallow mark is with a burst of high energy. It's not a lazy brush stroke. It's more like a flash that changes the very surface of the linen. That made people think of light, lasers, radiation, things that can zap just the topmost layer. In 2011, researchers at the European Nuclear Energy Agency, ENEA, tried a test that got headlines. They used a 40-nanosecond burst from an ultraviolet excimer laser and managed to make a scorch mark with the same shallow depth and color tone as the shroud image. It was the first time anyone had duplicated any part of the shroud image using light. Dr. Decoded noted how important that was, a piece of the puzzle finally copied by a flash of energy. Still, even that success was limited. They made a scorch that matched depth and tone, but not the whole mystery. The weave and the exact microscopic pattern remained unique. That stubborn uniqueness is the point. Every test that comes close only shows how special the cloth is. Real blood, rare type, trauma markers, pollen that tracks a long path, and an image that sits at the tiniest edge of the fibers. Copying it all at once? So far, impossible. Stains that speak. A study released in July 2024 added a fresh layer to the Shroud's story. Tiny things inside the cloth were read like clues. The paper found that the blood stains and the particles around them match the kind of pain described in the Gospels. Using artificial intelligence, scientists found creatinine particles together with ferritin. Those are not pretty words, but they matter. Creatinine often comes from strong muscle work and breakdown. Ferritin holds iron, often from blood and burned tissue. Together, they point to violent stress on the body. The study said this mix confirms, at a microscopic level, the very heavy torture suffered by Jesus of the Holy Shroud of Turin. Blood spots on the cloth were mapped across the double body image.
Is a 14-foot linen cloth that is believed to have wrapped the body of Jesus Christ after his crucifixion.
They were not random. Many marks matched wounds that come from flagellation. Thick, repeated lashes across the back and limbs. Tiny stains around the head fit a crown of thorns. Dark marks on the hands and feet fit the places where nails would have gone. A stain over the chest matched a deep post-mortem wound from a spear, the kind mentioned in the Bible. Giulio Fanti, an associate professor at the University of Padua, compiled the study. Fanti has measured and written about the shroud since 2004. His work is careful and heavy on data. The study asked one direct question: what do the threads in the blood actually show? An earlier, smaller study by Fanti and engineer Christian Privitera found something curious between the blood-stained threads.
Giulio Fanti, a professor of mechanical and thermal measurements and a scholar of the Shroud of Turin.
There was an almost clear thin substance filling tiny gaps. The team suggested this could be the fluid of pulmonary edema, fluid that builds up in the lungs when the body can no longer breathe well. If true, this fits old accounts that the man on the shroud suffered great trouble breathing while on the cross. The Shroud of Oviedo in Spain appears in this story. Tradition and some scientific work say that cloth cleaned Jesus' face after the crucifixion. Other scholars who studied the Oviedo cloth found similar traces. That fact echoed Fanti and Privitera's idea and gave more weight to the lung fluid theory on the Turin cloth.
The Shroud of Turin, which some believe to be the actual burial cloth.
The study looked closely at the face. The right eye stood out. It looked more sunken than the left one, and had a thin mark across the lid. That detail suggested more than one kind of blow to the head. A direct lash from a scourge could do it. So could a thorn from a crown pressed through the skin. Either way, the face bore marks that match the gospel picture of repeated strikes. All of this reads as a chain of small but clear clues. The particles and stains, the near-transparent lung film, the pattern across chest and limbs. They form a story that lines up with the old texts.
Controversial and mysterious Shroud of Turin, revered by millions.
The study does not claim absolute proof. Instead, it builds a close set of physical facts pointing to a man who suffered extreme trauma. The face in full. In Rome, researchers have used the tiny height changes and smudges on the Shroud of Turin to build a three-dimensional statue of what Jesus actually looked like.
So new technology is shedding a new light on questions like how old is the Turin Shroud?
The statue is a full-scale, solid version of the figure encoded on the cloth. It looks like an answer given in stone, bronze, and carbon, a face and body pulled from a flat linen map. The team used precise measurements taken from the shroud's image. Giulio Fanti supplied many of those measures. Professor Ponte led the group that turned the numbers into a form that people can walk around and study. Sculptor Sergio Radola worked with the University of Padua and a hospital to shape the final figure. The result is a sculpture that measures nearly 5 feet 11, taller than the average man of that time, which was close to 5 feet 5. The statue does more than show height. Every mark, bump, and hollow on the bronze or carbon copy comes from the map of light and dark on the cloth.
Used his own measurements of the impression on the shroud to create the carbon copy.
The shroud carries 3D information in the spaces between the highest and lowest points of the body, the parts closest to the cloth, and the parts that stand away. That depth code is not a modern secret. When the cloth pressed or sat over a form, it recorded distances. The farther a point of the body stood from the cloth, the lighter or darker that point looked in the data produced by early image analyzers. A tool called the VP8 Analyzer, a machine first used to study the Moon and Mars, helped unlock that code.
through this machine called a VP8 image analyzer, a 3D hologram of Jesus literally emerges.
It reads topography, the rise and fall of surfaces. When the shroud's photograph was run through the VP8, a holographic shape appeared. The image became not just a two-dimensional tone, but a map of distance. From that map, a three-dimensional model could be made. The artist then used those exact dimensions to carve or cast a replica in bronze, and later in carbon-based form, guided by the VP8 output and the measurements from Fanti and others. The statue bears wounds. The marks on the shroud have been read as wounds on a tortured body, and the sculpture reflects that reading. Professors and analysts counted the spots and scored the damage. One count found 370 wounds visible. Taking into account the body areas not fully shown on the shroud, the team estimated at least 600 blows. The cloth wrapped around the figure in ways that hide some sides and some parts. That means the shroud does not show every wound, especially on areas where the cloth did not lie directly against the skin. The statue, therefore, tries to show not only what is visible on the cloth, but what the cloth implies.
Using an exact copy, David Rolfe, who has studied the cloth for decades.
Curiosity rose about how the statue was made. Many articles described the final form, but left out details about the actual process. However, earlier work from 2017 and later explanations filled in the gap. The shroud's light and dark pattern can be read as a depth map, then turned into a holographic or 3D model. That model becomes a guide for an artist or for 3D machines. Whether the final hand was a sculptor's chisel, a CNC mill, or a modern 3D printer, the starting point stayed the same: precise digital dimensions pulled from the shroud's encoded shape. This statue changes how people look at the shroud. Instead of only studying loose threads, stains, and pollen, observers can now walk around a body built from those same traces. The statue forces a new kind of close look.
To try and confirm or disprove the authenticity of the actual Shroud of Turin.
Questions that once lived only on paper. How tall was he? How were the wounds placed? How did cloth meet flesh? Now sit in 3 dimensions. The result is not proof of any single story, but it is a powerful physical way to read the shroud. Relief or real? In 2025, a Brazilian digital designer named Cicero Moraes put a new idea on the table. Moraes builds faces and bodies in a computer. He works with tools used for museum reconstructions and film makeup. For the Shroud of Turin, he asked a simple question: does the cloth fall the same way over a real person as it does over a low-relief carving?
The Shroud of Turin will be displayed once again inside the Dome of Turin on Holy Saturday, March 30th.
The shroud shows a long, faint face and body. Some see a blanket wrapped around a dead man. Others see a print made in some other way. Moraes wanted to take the guesswork out of the argument, so he built 2 models inside his software. One model was a full 3-dimensional human body. The other was a low-relief form, a shallow sculpture where the body stands out just a little from a flat base. Then came the test. Virtual cloth was draped over each model. The program calculated how fabric folds, stretches, and presses when it meets a shape. The result was simple to read. When cloth fell over the 3-dimensional body, the folds and shadows looked like cloth on a real man. The image the fabric would make was shaped by the roundness of a full body. But when the cloth fell over the low-relief form, something else happened. The virtual fabric hugged the shallow shapes and flattened in different ways. The face and body showed a strange, puffed and distorted look.
And this Easter, officials say, once again, the fragile cloth will not be put on display.
Wider cheeks, a flattened nose, a stretched torso. This matched a very old photograph of the shroud taken in 1931 more closely than the full-body drape did. Moraes called this kind of distortion the Agamemnon mask effect. The name points to a famous ancient mask found in a Mycenaean tomb. That mask looked oddly wide and puffy compared with a real face. When a flat or shallow object gets wrapped or printed, its features can look larger and odd. The same thing seemed to have happened with the shroud image. The fabric did not read like it had wrapped a real body. It read like it had been pressed against a shallow raised surface. Moraes suggested a clear, bold idea. A low-relief matrix could have been used to make the image. It might have been painted or heated in just the places that touched the cloth. When cloth touched those raised areas, a mark could form only where there was contact. The result would be a shallow but accurate impression. In other words, the shroud might be a very careful work made in a funerary or ritual setting, a type of art that fits into medieval practices. History adds fuel to this idea.
It documents the history of death care, and it's something that we don't talk about very often in our culture.
The shroud was first recorded in the late 1300s, and the carbon dating done in 1989 placed its creation between 1260 and 1390. Those dates point to the medieval period, a time when craftsmen carved religious figures in low relief for churches and tombs. Many art historians already saw links between medieval religious art and the way the shroud looks. Mariza's digital test gave that link a fresh, technical twist. The virtual draping matched real photos from 1931 almost exactly, Mariza wrote. That was the key moment. It changed the debate from guesswork to a testable model. The low-relief idea does not erase other evidence or end the argument. Instead, it offers a clear path for further study. If the image was made by a low-relief matrix, then the shroud might be read as a masterpiece of Christian art made in a funerary context, rather than the direct imprint of a wrapped corpse. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Artificial intelligence is rewriting the way we uncover the past, solving mysteries once thought impossible. From reconstructing ancient languages to piecing together lost civilizations, AI's ability to process vast amounts of data has opened new frontiers in history and archaeology. Now, the Shroud of Turin is finally decoded by an AI, and it shocks everyone. The system's analysis offered stunning insights that challenged centuries of belief, sparking both excitement and outrage. Supporters hail it as proof of AI's unmatched potential, while critics warn that algorithms may distort history through flawed assumptions or hidden bias. As technology accelerates, the question grows more urgent. Will AI become the ultimate truth seeker or the most persuasive storyteller of them all? The answer may shape how humanity remembers its past and imagines its future. Not so fast. When Mariza's new claim hit the headlines, it did not land quietly. The International Center of Syndenology, the Turin group that studies and protects the shroud, pushed back hard. Their answer was not only short, it was sharp. The center said the idea was not new. The so-called Agamemnon mask effect has been known for more than a century, the group argued. That effect describes how an image can look strange when cloth wraps a shallow form. In short, a flat or low-relief shape can make a face look oddly wide, or a nose seem flattened when a sheet sits over it. For the Guardians, this was not a surprising observation. It had already been studied and debated long ago. Questions came next about the tools used to make the claim. The center said the software that produced the digital model is not made for strict scientific work. The simulated physics in the program and the lack of a real support plane, a real surface under the cloth, were singled out.
Pierce the side of Christ, reconstructions all based on the scientific and historical data.
In other words, the virtual test did not match a real physical setting. Cloth behaves in many tiny ways when it meets a body or a statue. If the program does not model every one of those small behaviors, the result can be misleading. Turin's Archbishop, Cardinal Roberto Ripolle, added a cool, formal voice to the reply. His office refused to treat the new claim as a major matter. The Archbishop said there was no reason to comment on hypotheses freely formulated by scientists of varying degrees of credibility. He warned against quick conclusions and named the real danger, superficial work that does not survive close review. The center then leaned on a famous scientific rule. It quoted Richard Feynman, the brilliant physicist, who warned that scientists must report everything that could make their experiment invalid.
That matches and corresponds with all of the details of Jesus' death by Roman crucifixion.
The first principle is that you must not fool yourself, and you are the easiest person to fool, Feynman wrote. The center used that line like a mirror. If a method leaves out important facts, the result can look convincing but still be wrong. All of this is not just about pride. It is about how questions get answered. A digital test can suggest an idea, but it must also show every tiny assumption. Where did the digital cloth touch? How was gravity set in the model? Was the cloth allowed to slide or to stick? Did the simulation model air, friction, and tiny folds? The center wants those answers spelled out. If they are not, the result remains a draft, not a final chapter. The debate also points to the larger fight between old methods and new tools. Digital design can be fast and clever. It can show shapes that the eye misses. Yet old hands insist that lab tests, physical replicas, and repeatable experiments still matter. For the Guardians, a virtual match with a photograph is not a full proof. It is a start, and a start must be tested in the open. This back and forth shows how fragile conclusions can be. An idea that looks clean on a computer screen must survive reality's messy laws. The center's pushback asks for more than a flashy image. It asks for full disclosure. Every setting, every assumption, every step. That is the kind of proof Feynman wanted, the kind that says, here is everything that might make this wrong. From night to controversy. The first known chapter in the story of the Shroud of Turin opens in 1354 in the quiet countryside of medieval France. A knight named Geoffroy de Charny presented an unusual cloth to the dean of the church in Lirey, a small town in the north-central part of the country. It was no ordinary sheet. De Charny claimed it was the very burial shroud that had wrapped Jesus Christ after the crucifixion. Where did he get it?
About moving Jesus' body from the execution site to the burial site.
That part remains a mystery. No surviving record explains how it came into his hands, or where it had been for the 13 centuries after the time of Jesus. All that is known is that it appeared suddenly in Lirey, already carrying the faint image of a man. The shroud drew crowds, but it also drew trouble. In 1389, Pierre d'Arcis, the Bishop of Troyes, went on the attack. According to his account, an artist had confessed to forging the image. Convinced it was a fraud, the bishop wrote to Pope Clement VII to denounce the cloth. The Pope's reply was unexpected. Instead of banning the display, he declared the shroud a man-made religious icon, not a holy relic, and allowed the church in Lirey to keep showing it. It was a political compromise. The faithful could still venerate it, but the church would not officially call it the real burial cloth of Jesus. In 1453, the shroud changed hands again. This time, it was acquired by the powerful House of Savoy, an Italian royal family. They brought it to Chambéry, a city that is now part of France, and placed it in a chapel. There, disaster struck in 1532. A fire swept through the building, scorching the shroud and leaving distinctive triangular burn marks that can still be seen today.
Given what happened with the fire, that those oils and perfumes would have evaporated.
The Savoy family later moved the cloth to Turin, their capital, in 1578, a move that would eventually give the shroud its modern name. From that point on, Turin became its permanent home.
I have a souvenir that no one else has. Could motivate the development of something like the Shroud of Turin.
For centuries, debate raged over whether the cloth was genuine. In the late 20th century, new scientific studies brought fresh intrigue. Pollen samples taken from the fibers were found to match pollen found in and around Jerusalem.
The only cloth that had a comparable amount of natural aging as fibers from the shroud.
This research, described in botanist Avinoam Danin's 1999 book Flora of the Shroud of Turin, offered what many saw as the strongest clue yet that the cloth might indeed have originated in the Holy Land. Even so, the shroud's authenticity remains one of history's great unsolved puzzles. It has inspired fierce arguments, deep devotion, and careful study in equal measure. And for the past 4 centuries, it has rested in the Cathedral of St. John the Baptist in Turin, watched over by both science and faith, and still holding its secrets close.